Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 18, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? By Horace McCoy. And welcome once again to Point Blank. My name is Kurt, and my dance partner for today's dance marathon of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? It's Justin. How you doing, Justin?
I'm all right, Kurt. How are you today?
I'm pretty good.
Great. Let's conclude the show.
All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Well, we're here today to discuss Horace McCoy's They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And, well, what did you think of this interesting little book, Justin?
This is an interesting one, and ultimately, I really do like it. But I would say that this is one of the more unique books we've read since we started this podcast. It doesn't have the typical crime trope that you'd expect, or at least it's shaped in a different way. It's focused entirely on a dance marathon, which in and of itself is sort of bizarre, and you wouldn't expect that to be enough to drive any plot forward. And yet it does. It's set during the Depression, which evokes for me like people like Kane and Thompson, but it does very different things and is almost more like a philosophical novel than it is a straight up hard-boiled crime novel. Yet it is hard-boiled. So I guess my answer is complicated because this book, despite being like 120 pages, is pretty complex and strange. And I read it once last year, and I've read it again, and it still has this intensity. I'm surprised that it isn't better known, but I also understand why it's not better known. So, in other words, it's perplexing, and I can't wait to talk about it.
I mean, it is. It's unlike anything else you're going to read in the genre, really, that I'm aware of. And certainly, another thing that seems to come up a lot with these books that we cover from this era is I had to keep going back in my head. This was published in 1935.
Yes.
It's almost, 80-some years old at this point?
Yeah, totally.
I mean, other than the dance marathon portion of it, which we'll get into that in a little bit, but there's so many concepts in this book that you could see something like this coming out today. Maybe today people would write it around a reality TV show or something of that nature. But it's got a lot of tough concepts in it. It is definitely hard boiled. It covers stuff that might be considered edgy today. And also the structure of the novel this is a novella. It's structured in a way that certainly still feels fresh and interesting now. I'm not really sure how many people played with a format like this prior to this novel. I'm sure people did. But just even the layout of the book is important to how the story unfolds.
Oh, totally. I think you see some stylistic moves that Horace McCoy makes here that are intriguing. And I know that in my readings, this wasn't how the book, at least in an earlier draft, was presented. This was one of the later drafts where it ended up sort of getting more choppy, where he sort of pulled the courtroom narrative out and spliced it through the book, which we'll talk about. That wasn't like that at first. I think he had more of a linear novel, but this decision to sort of like splice it all up, that was a conscious move on his part. I'm not sure what motivated it, but it helped to give it this sort of a stylistic twist. But in addition to that, you mentioned this is a weird book. It's a book that you could see it being written today and it would still have power because it's dealing with universal themes. It's dealing with philosophical themes. And although it's set during the Depression, you don't get a sense, you don't get the datedness. You're not seeing references to Okies with their bindle stiffs and like it could just be plopped down in LA right now in the new Great Depression and have a dance marathon. There would be a little bit higher tech and maybe people would be wearing different shoes. But what difference would it make? Like the same building could still be there. And the story is really just about people and their interactions and their frustrations. And that stuff's universal. So impressive and timeless. And timeless is the hallmark of a book that can be read and reread if it's well written and if it says something. And I think this book does.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if I were to give this is a really difficult book to rate. And I mean, I would probably say this is like a 4 out of 5 for me, but yet on the other hand, I wouldn't hesitate. I think any fan of the genre should really read this thing because it is so unique and, as you said, so timeless. So I would really encourage our listeners to give it a read. And it is, I mean, it's novella length. It's only like 120 pages, and that's kind of pushing it with larger font and interesting layout choices.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a short book.
Justin, why don't you give us a little summary of this book just so we know what we're talking about here?
Sure, I'll go as light as I can on this first one. I feel like this book, for its length, has so much to say, and I know that we're going to talk about that in a little while, sort of discuss the relationship to this book and the philosophical movement, existentialism. But let me just give you a breakdown of what happens in this book for those of you who are not familiar. So, as Kurt said, this was published in 1935, which when you read it, it could be an eye-opener, but given the way that it's written and the stuff they talk about, it's sort of reminiscent of how we were both like, our eyes were open when we realized, or it dawned on us how James M. Cain wrote, they always shoot horses. They always shoot postmen, don't they? Similarly to James M. Cain, when Postman Always Rings Twice, it was shocking to realize that book was written so early, or before, or preceding a lot of Chandler's work, similar to this one. And for those of you who are wondering, They Shoot Horses, Don't They is not a book about horses. One of our listeners on Goodreads mentioned that they thought it was going to be sort of like a Western-y noir thing. And I did too at first. I have an affinity toward Western noir. So I thought, well, this is it. This is like a Continental Op goes to the old rodeo or something. But it is not that. It is actually a story about a dance marathon. And we'll actually talk more in the episode about what the hell is a dance marathon and what's the sort of culture behind that. But also in this book, there is murder. The LA Review of Books mentions or wrote once that They Shoot Horses, Don't They is a crime novel that is uniquely impatient when it comes to laying out the actual crime, preferring instead to methodically focus on the crime's causes to an agonizing degree. It is a crime novel in which the crime is not a matter of suspense, but of making sense. I think that's an interesting sort of setup for this, because it is an irregular crime novel. You don't get the typical mystery or buildup of suspense that you're accustomed to if you're familiar with the genre and read it often. Simone de Beauvoir, the French existentialist, called it the first existential novel in America. We're going to spend more time unpacking what that exactly means, but in terms of when it was put out and what it says, the content in such a small package, it really runs deep in terms of thought and explores topics that are just not normally touched upon in American fiction at the time, in a way that pushes the hardboiled genre into new territory and gets it some of the scholarly attention that allows for it to be read by us today. Because if all this stuff was just pulp and nobody really paid any mind to it outside of a handful of folks in between like their working class jobs, this stuff might not be known today. It might just fade away. So I think this attention is a good thing ultimately, and we'll talk about that later. The book was also turned into a movie by Sidney Pollack. It came out in the late 1960s, starred Robert Mitchum. I've heard some things about it being good. I don't know a lot about it, so if any listeners out there have thoughts on the film in relation to the book, you should send us a note or post something on Goodreads or on our Facebook page. The novel starts like this. I stood up. For a moment, I saw Gloria again, sitting on that bench on the pier. The bullet had just struck her in the side of the head. The blood had not even started to flow. The flash from the pistol still lighted her face. Everything was as plain as day. She was completely relaxed, was completely comfortable. The impact of the bullet had turned her head a little away from me. I did not have a perfect profile view, but I could see enough of her face and her lips to know she was smiling. So that's the start of this novel. And for a novel that's focused on crime, we get the crime real quick. And that's sort of the twist. This is essentially the setup that reveals the ending. And like the LA Review of Books, the rest of the book is sort of going back and telling the story of how we got to this point. The book is interestingly crafted in that every chapter or so we get more dialogue like this that tells the story of what happened during the committing of the crime and the following courthouse trial. And then we get into the depth of each chapter, retelling the story of our two main characters, how they meet and how they come to end up participating in a dance marathon on the Santa Monica Pier. Speaking of our two main characters, we have Gloria Beatty, and we have Robert Severson. I think that's how we pronounce their names. This is set in Depression-era Santa Monica, 1930s-ish. Both of these characters are sort of down and out. Robert is a down-and-out chump. He just got turned down for another acting role, and he dreams these sort of fanciful dreams of being a film director. This is where his meaning lies, this ever unattainable dream of his. And he runs into Gloria one day as he's walking out of Paramount Studios. He doesn't know who she is. They start talking, though. And she's also just been in pursuit of an extra position in the movie business, and she got turned down. So they're like hustlers. And as we know today, there's so many folks, millennials out there, hustling, working multiple jobs, trying to figure out a way to make a living, that this experience in the Depression era looks a lot like, sadly, what we see today in an era that's supposedly the time of a robust economy. So it makes you wonder. They're both looking for jobs. They're coming up short. They're both from not in Hollywood. They came from the East, came from the Southeast, and they're looking to make it big. Like Axl Rose coming to start Guns N' Roses in LA, or any of those other great stories of people, desperate people hoping to find their dreams in Los Angeles. So this is a noir tale for that reason. These people come to town. They're looking to make it big. And of course, they find out that life has other plans. Here's another great quote from Gloria early on that helps establish her character. I haven't told you much about who they are, but this will be telling. She says to Robert, "I'll tell you what I'd do if I had the guts. I'd walk out of a window or throw myself in front of a streetcar or something." This kind of banter isn't a one-off. You see it again and again from Gloria. She has a very dire view of the world, and she's not afraid to show it. One of my criticisms, and we'll probably talk about her a good bit later, is that she's a little bit one note. She just harps on this message, this sort of negative, life is meaningless, embittered, I want to check out message throughout the whole book. But if you think of her more as like a philosophical stand-in, that it makes sense. But if you're actually wanting her to be some kind of great growth character, then you're going to be disappointed. Later on, they depart and they come back together, and eventually she coaxes Robert, without too much effort, into participating in what they call a marathon dance contest. Apparently they were very common in the era as ways for people who were destitute, who were looking for something out of work, out of hope. They can go sign up for these dance contests, and they dance, and the contest is a marathon that literally goes on for weeks. The last couple standing receives money. And during the time of the dance, you get free room and board. Not that you sleep much, because you're perpetually dancing almost, but it's a way for you to be brought in from the cold, like a homeless shelter, except you're responsible for dancing perpetually to a crowd of spectators who gawk at you. Not unlike reality television. Once we're in the dance contest, we don't essentially leave. The rest of the story, or the heart of the story, is about being in this large building, dancing. And from the start, Gloria wants to die, and you could tell it. She says it. She's bitter. She doesn't like her life. And Robert tries to cheer her up and go, "Oh, come on, she doesn't really think that, according to him." Meanwhile, the promoters of this dance are trying various schemes to increase attendance, and they're trying to publicize it, because this is a profit motive dance contest to them. Their whole interest is in packing the place in and getting the press in and getting money. Toward the end, obviously there's only a few couples standing, and our couple happens to be one of them. Then there is a murder, and the whole thing gets shut down before we get to crown a victor. And instead of somebody winning $1,000, everybody who's left just gets $50, and the thing's over. And at the end of the story, we finally get to the point at which the story began. Gloria and Robert go outside for the first time in 5 weeks. Gloria pulls a pistol out of her bag and asks Robert to shoot her. Robert remembers at this point when he was young and his grandfather shot the beloved family horse, which had broken its leg. The police then ask Robert why he shot Gloria, and he says, "Because she asked me to." And then the policeman persisted, And Robert answers, "They shoot horses, don't they?" And that's the novel.
Because it's so short, and we also know that Robert did this at the beginning of the book, this is definitely another novel where how everything transpires is as important as the climax at the ending. So I would definitely recommend reading it because that there's so much punchy dialogue in here, and also that opening sequence as you read is just wonderful. I thought.
I thought so too. And you're right. This is a story about the relationships on the dance floor, the relationships between couples, the relationships between dancers and promoter, and then between dancers and audience. All these three groups of people serve an essential function to creating drama and tension in the story. And I glossed over that. If I had to, given what I know about this book and its impact and how it makes me feel when I read it, I'd give it 4.5 shots to the head on a pier above the ocean waves that, much like Sisyphus, break unrelentingly and pointlessly against the shore.
I think I originally was thinking it was a 4 out of a 5 book, but this is one that I'm continually thinking about what happened in the book. And in that case, maybe that does give it a higher ranking. But again, it is a difficult book to give a rating to. And I think this is one that's either going to speak to you or it's not. And I think if you're a fan of crime fiction, it's going to speak to you because it covers in such a short piece some of those fundamental elements of why noir, hard-boiled, and crime fiction is interesting.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And it's a thinker's book too. If you're just into Mike Hammer, then this might feel like it's not going to pay off the way that a Hammer style book would. But if you're more into the thinking of the crime and the contextualization of hard-boiled and noir fiction, where it sort of transcends the genre just a little bit and forces you to think about stuff beyond it, then this book is pretty much the template for that, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree. Let's talk a little bit more about these dance marathons, because I think, as you said, you could easily change this book a little bit and make it a modern tale. But the most archaic part of the book is probably this dance marathon. So what are these things? And you kind of mentioned that it is essentially the reality programming of its day, that the people went and watched this stuff for entertainment and to escape the drudgery of their lives. Or in the case of this, even Hollywood people it was a place to be seen. These marathons, they started in the 1920s, and so of course the Roaring 20s, there's a lot of prosperity, there's a lot of changes in society. It's more, I guess, liberated, you could say. There's a growing, there's changes in how society looks at sexuality, stuff like that happened during the 20s. It was that kind of time where a lot of stuff was happening. Another thing that contributed to these dance marathons is there was a lot of interest in the renewal of the Olympic Games, the modern Olympics, and along with that, interest in the Guinness World Records. So this is a time frame where people setting records, competitions, and this sort of thing was really big in society. You may have seen pictures from the same era of people who would sit on chairs on top of flagpoles and stuff like that. Well, that's the same kind of time frame that all of this is going on. So that was the craze of the era. And again, it starts like many of these things. It starts as entertainment in the 20s, and it I guess you could look at it as the lighthearted end of entertainment. It would change into the 30s. These things start as more reasonable records. In 1923, the first dance record was set by Alma Cummings. She was a dance instructor, and she danced for 27 hours straight, which still sounds kind of ridiculous, but that is within the realm of being reasonable, unlike what we're going to see coming down the road. And it didn't take very long for people to break that record. So, of course, in 1929, the stock market crashes. That's when Justin was talking about these dance marathons are becoming the little darker edges of them come out. The fact that people could win prize money that was more money than you could make in a year on the family farm, or working a regular job if you could even get a job. So there was a lot of hope here that, hey, we'll enter this contest and see if we can make some big money for the time. for both the dancers and the spectators, it was an escape from dire circumstances. People were, they were desperate for entertainment. They were bored. And, unfortunately for the actual dancers, for many, it really was a safe place to be. You had a roof over your head, you had food, and you got at least a little bit of sleep when they allowed you to sleep. But it was, especially for women, it was a safe place, because at least it was supervised, more so than, being on the streets. As you'll see in the book, they add, to keep things, I guess, interesting, they would add different rules and different like little mini contests within the bigger contest, to make it more difficult or to more quickly eliminate people. And this got to be such a problem that people actually died in these dance marathons, and they started to get outlawed in certain places in the country. So that's where we start seeing the darkness of the dance competition that is found in this novel. So a fun little fact here is that the record holders at the time, or at the end of this phase, were a guy named Calum DeViller, and his dance partner was Vani Kurczynski, and they danced for 3,780 hours for a cash prize of $1,000. That was it was like half a year of dancing under these conditions. And remember, most of these competitions had something where you would dance for an hour and maybe get a 10 to 15 minute break. And then as the competition wore on, those breaks would get shorter and shorter. So talk about sleep deprived.
It's just insane.
Yeah. And as the 30s progressed, they fell out of favor because the morality of the country shifted, along with the Depression, especially after World War II. It wasn't really much of a thing anymore. Now, an interesting fact about this is when the film version came out in the 60s, the one that was Justin mentioned and starred Jane Fonda, a group of college students decided to recreate the dance marathon, but instead of doing it for prize money like they do in the book, they started doing this as a charity event. This is essentially the precursor for all of these walkathons, different fundraising attempts by organizations today, where you sponsor somebody and, give them $1 per mile that they walk or whatever that people do. That was inspired by the film version of this book, They Shoot Horses, Don't They?
I was very surprised when I first read this about the dance marathons. I had no idea about this thing. Like, literally, it never came up. When is it ever come up? I don't think it's ever been discussed outside of my, in my experience, my direct research into this book. And I know you came across a couple of cool articles, and somebody else, I think, posted one on one of our sites, but it's just fascinating, and a fascinating time in the history of the United States that even other noir writers, I don't recall Kane or anybody else mentioning them. So that I find that to be interesting as well.
One of our listeners did mention that our buddy Cornell Woolrich has a couple of pieces that are centered around dance marathons.
Oh,
but
my God.
Since he never left his house, I'm not exactly sure how he would have much experience on that.
Yeah, I guess he must have got the newspapers. Yeah, good old Cornell. I guess we'll have to check into those one of these days. Give them another shot.
I would encourage the listeners to go and Google image search dance marathons, and there are some crazy pictures. People. The rules were basically that you had to keep moving, or at least one of your partners would have to keep moving. So there's like women sleeping with their partner holding them up in the air. And there's like, just crazy pictures of the spectacle of these things, on Google Images. So check that out.
I mean, that's the part that's really, like, I have a hard time wrapping my head around. It's not so much the philosophy here. It's how do these people stay conscious over the course of weeks when they're literally getting 10 minutes of sleep every 2 hours.
I don't know. I don't get that either. Like, how are they not all insane?
Yeah, because we're talking like at most, if they actually fell asleep in that 10 minutes, half the time they're not. They're like eating, or they're getting their feet rubbed or taking a bath. You're looking at maybe an hour to an hour and a half of sleep a day, every day, for like multiple weeks. That's just, that's like a suicide mission. So that part just boggles my mind.
I'm wondering if there isn't a little bit of, just like reality television today, like if, at 3 o'clock in the morning when there's no spectators around, if people didn't get some sleep.
Like maybe there is like a 4-hour block or something that's just not being mentioned.
It's entertainment like anything else, so it's a lot of smoke and mirrors kind of stuff. I wonder if that was the case.
That's true, and it could very well be, and I would be okay with that. But given that we're looking at like trying to understand the history of it, I'd be surprised that it wasn't in the historical documentation. Now that the smoke and mirrors is gone, nobody's trying to make a dollar. So why is it still not even in the stories of it? So the jury's still out there. So yeah, now we got a little bit of a grounding on dance marathons, and we have a sense of what this book's about a little bit. Maybe it's a good time to go into our subject unknown, where we dig in a little bit into the philosophy of existentialism in relation to not just this book itself, but all of American noir fiction as it came to a head in the 40s and 50s.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Subject unknown.
And welcome to Subject Unknown, where we discuss in this case, not random topic related to crime fiction. We're talking about existentialism. What is it, and how does it relate to crime fiction? This is a huge topic, and one that Justin and I are, only moderately qualified to answer. We are certainly not philosophy professors or anything like that, but we're going to try to tackle this one. And it's probably a topic that we are going to have to come back to, or maybe mention in future novels as we look at them, because so much of crime fiction does relate to existentialism. So, Justin, what is existentialism?
Oh, here we go. So, okay. So the grounding of this is that this book, They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, was once called by Simone de Beauvoir, French existentialist, and partner to Jean-Paul Sartre, who we'll get back to in a moment. She called this work the first existential novel to have appeared in America. And now, if you're coming at this from a philosophical perspective or from any other perspective where you understand who de Beauvoir was and what the existentialists were doing, this is a pretty vaunted statement to make about a text. And it actually turned Horace McCoy into a sensation in France. And we've talked about the French obsession with American noir and the série noir, and how that relationship has sort of cross-pollinated. We give, Hard Boiled gets exported to France. France then writes their own and then creates the genre of film noir. Film noir gets returned back to the States, and then we go off and run with that. So it's been a cool cultural, or at least it was a cultural cross-pollination in the mid-20th century. But this is the book that sort of was considered by not only de Beauvoir, but also Sartre and Camus and some others to be a significant piece of not just hard-boiled crime writing, but philosophical literature. Of course, in the United States, this wasn't the case. Very few people read it or cared, and because this wasn't a philosophical movement in the States so much as it was in France. So now what does this mean? For those of us or people who call themselves existentialists, or, what does it mean for the average reader of American crime fiction? Not much, really. It doesn't really matter at all. But it does something, as I've said before, for the genre. It helped to give attention to a genre that was born in the pulps and could have easily died in the pulps. It turned this genre into something else, something that was considered from different angles, something that was now looked at for potentially literary or philosophical excellence. It turned highbrow heads in the direction of noir and some of the pulp fiction. There's the lowbrow stuff and there's the highbrow stuff. And what happened was it helped to bring attention to a genre that could have easily just floundered out and faded away as the pulp, dissolved in the rain, because pulp is not made to last. But instead, we have this scholarly attention suddenly foisted upon this writing, and books are being generated, and academics are making careers studying this stuff. So I think, to keep it simple and short, it's actually essential that this conversation started to happen in the 1930s and 40s about this stuff that we read and love. This podcast probably wouldn't be able to be what it is because we wouldn't have access to all these great works were it not for the existentialists and others like him who said, hey, wait a second, this shit is really interesting. It has power and it has merit beyond simple entertainment. That being said, I'm avoiding the actual question Kurt had posed, which is, what is existentialism? And the follow-up question would be then, how is a book like They Shoot Horses, Don't They, an existential novel, or at least one that has existential themes?
Well, Justin, I think once we look at what existentialism actually is, I think as you read this book, you're going to see why it's an existential novel, because the idea of any philosophy really is, what is my purpose and why am I here? And for existentialism, this was a big deal because really prior to this mode of philosophy, I mean, there are some concepts that come first, but the origins of existentialism come from like the mid 1800s in that time frame. But prior to that, most answers to those kinds of questions were based in religion, and philosophers connected to the foundations of not just existentialism, but this new train of thought. It breaks this concept of why am I here and what's my purpose away from religion and into the self. And existentialism, existentialists believe that the world wasn't created for a reason and it doesn't exist for a reason, which is contrary to, basically every religious belief. So we as humans, we have this freedom basically to choose our own moral code. And the only way that we can establish what that moral code is for ourselves. And then the only true meaning in life, if there is such a thing, is to live authentically by the moral code that we create. And then what gets interesting when you get into philosophy like this is then, somebody like Nietzsche and the idea of nihilism comes into play here. Well, then people would say, well, I can just do whatever the hell I want and it doesn't matter. But existentialists believe that, no, we're still judged by the values that we choose to accept, and we're defined by our actions. So if we're looking at those concepts of our own moral code and being defined by our actions, then I think a ton of noir that's what noir is really discussing a lot of the time.
I think you're right about that, and I think that is one of the major tenets, at least of the Sartrean existentialism, because of course not everybody is on board with existentialism, because truly it's not so much a philosophical doctrine as it is more like a movement. And like you said, Nietzsche had some guidance in the shaping of it, so did Kierkegaard, and it preceded all of these guys, but also it's the folks in the mid-20th, Sartre in particular and Simone de Beauvoir, who really exploded it and it became sort of a pop culture fad. And France was all over it because France actually loves and respects its public intellectuals. But that's a whole nother topic. But what you said about the early American noir and even our hard-boiled detectives that we know and love, having that moral code. And, I've wondered, where did that code come from? I first came across it, probably unconsciously, watching Star Wars with a character like Han Solo, sort of rugged anti-hero, plays by his own rules. I'm like, that's charming and that's interesting, but I didn't understand what it meant. And so much of it has to do in a lot of ways with some of this basic tenet of existentialism, which is essentially there is no God, there is no ultimate meaning in the universe. We're just flying through space on a giant blue rock at 1,000 miles an hour, and there's no inherent meaning in our life. There's nothing that makes us or that gives us a purpose beyond that which we make ourselves. Sartre called this existence preceding essence. We are born. We don't have anything that comes before us that gives us a human nature or a purpose, divine or otherwise. Our parents can't tell us or make us be anything. Our cultures can't force us into certain roles. Those are all just shit that people made up who are now dead. Traditions essentially made up by people before you, peer pressuring you from the grave. This stuff isn't anything coherent or meaningful inherently. So essentially, what do we do and how do we live? How do we be free? And Sartre thinks that freedom, in a lot of ways, is entirely up to us. And, we talk about these detectives with their moral code. That's sort of like step 3 of existentialism. Once you've gotten through the fear and despair and anguish of the stereotype, like a black and white French new wave film of people smoking cigarettes on beds, filled with ennui and despair, being like, life's pointless. What's the meaning of anything? And it's sort of like a stereotype and and also a bad faith representation of what existentialism really is, because it's actually quite positive. And if you were to ask people what, is existentialism like a optimistic, perspective on life, a lot of people would say, fuck no, that's like depressing. There's a bunch of depressed people moping, right? It's like goth kids smoking cigarettes, or like every teenager in the 1990s, right?
Sure, and then I think that's why it gets confused, because it is so bleak looking at first. I believe that it was Sartre who said that it's a terrifying abundance of freedom.
Yes.
In today's society, I mean, we still would struggle with that, but especially when these ideas are first coming out, it is a big shift in society, and you're going from a society with very strict, especially Victorian era, very strict moral codes, very, I don't want to say closed-minded, but very controlled, to then be given freedom, and then, okay, now what do I do with it? And that's, as you said, that's sort of the bad side of it, is you see these people, oh my gosh, there's nothing out there, and we could even look at like, the work of like H.P. Lovecraft, in this cosmic horror kind of thing is all about that.
Sure. Yeah. Him and Kafka, all these like these deep seated like anxieties that are being transmogrified into like horrors, cockroaches and creatures from the abyss. Yeah. It's sort of humans trying to grapple with and perhaps come to recognize the absolute meaningless of our time here on Earth, and that we will die, and that's absolute. That's like the one guarantee. And yeah, how do you process that without going crazy, or without, as Albert Camus suggested, when he started to talk about absurdism, he said, why don't, and not he didn't suggest it, but he posited this question: why don't we commit suicide, knowing what we know? If we accept these premises, why don't we just get the hell out of here? Because it's like a paradox, this idea that we should have meaning and we should strive in life, but we know fully that their existence is meaningless. There is no meaning. There's no purpose to any of it. Anything we do attach meaning to is just bullshit. And we just do it to pass the time, to distract ourselves from the ultimate truth. So, I mean, it can be frightening if you can get stuck in that phase and either check out or run back to something like religion or tradition to hold on to, like a safety net or like a security blanket, right?
Yeah, but to break through all of that, and I think individually you can do that, not necessarily quickly, but in a progression. But society, that phrase I used, the ultimate answer for at least some existentialists is that the answer then is to live authentically to your moral code. And man, in our society now, like, live authentically, that's practically a fucking brand name.
Yeah.
In many ways, society is sort of catching up with, getting past, well, not past, but the sunny aspect of existentialism is out there. And obviously a lot of people are trying to seek that.
Sure. As, theoretically organized religion and other grand narratives have, started to fade, but also, I mean, this existential attitude or approach and way of seeing the world isn't and was never new, but capitalism sure has found a way to monetize it, and that's a whole nother thing that sort of feeds back into this story. Like, they shoot horses, don't they? It doesn't exactly help us to understand existentialism so much as to find a way of turning it into something that ironically sort of goes against the whole point of it.
So, and maybe we can talk more about this in our main topic about the book. Looking at these things, there's a ton of things that we can see in They Shoot Horses, Don't They, that speak to existentialism. The entire metaphor of the dance marathon, for one, Gloria's general attitude. I mean, she's definitely, ultimately she brings Robert into this as well, but she's living by her own, she has her own moral code, and she's very blunt about it.
Yeah. I mean, she's condemned to be free. She's existentialism and absurdism in a nutshell.
In this case, it's a very magnified version of these characters, but that is certainly a theme we see time and time again in crime fiction.
Totally. I mean, this is a great example, and I'm glad that we're doing this now, because this book is so chock full of ways of approaching this philosophically, this concept. But I mean, the books that preceded it, from James M. Cain, We have Frank Chambers. He's also this sort of rudderless guy trying to create meaning in an absurd universe, and it doesn't go very well for him. We have our detectives that we already mentioned. We got Marlowe, and we got the Continental Op, and we have Sam Spade. And remember back in the Maltese Falcon, the story of Footcraft?
Yes. Oh, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a little existentialist story in a nutshell. So
Yeah. For
yeah,
sure.
this stuff has been running through as a thread from a rise of the more literary hard-boiled stuff, starting with Dash, and then it continues into, as we move from like the Depression, the era of the Depression, where despair and anxiety, these things don't come from reading French philosophers. They come from real lived experience and having to deal with life being scary. And the Depression was scary for Americans, just like World War I was scary for the Europeans. And then all of a sudden we move into World War II, where things get really scary for everybody, especially in Europe. And we end up with our big American noir movement with Jim Thompson, and we have Cornell Woolrich rise from whatever black shadows he grew up in, and David Goodis. And all of these characters, almost all of their books, are dealing with existentialism in some way. Absurd heroes or existential figures who are trying to create their way, make good choices in a world without meaning, but then most of the times they end up making a choice that doesn't work out too well for them. And that's just a part of it too. I mean, we're responsible. There are consequences for our actions. It's not nihilism. And the choices we make, we can't blame on organized religion or politics or some other structure that made us do stupid things. We only have ourselves to blame. And I think that's why so much of this stuff is so hard-hitting, because it's like looking in a mirror. It's up to us. And it's not easy.
No, the search for meaning in a meaningless world is certainly not an easy thing, but yet here we go, we're all doing it.
Yep, totally. And as we segue back into discussing the book in part 2, we're going to probably spend a lot of time talking about Gloria, because if you haven't read The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, just read this book. This is like the Cliff Notes version of The Myth of Sisyphus. The dance floor, the endless marathon, just going around in circles. It's like pushing a rock up a hill. And Gloria, rather than wanting to break through to the other side of existential anguish, decides to take answer the Camus question by just checking out instead. So much in this small little package, and so much more to explore. I can't wait to dig into this book in all its depth in part 2.
Yeah, sounds good, and I hope you've enjoyed Philosophy 101 with Justin and Kurt. You can, all errors can be reported to our Facebook page. Well, listeners, if you're like us and you just can't get enough crime fiction, there are other crime fiction podcasts out there, and one of the ones that I really enjoy, and I'm not just saying that, I do enjoy this show, this Writer Types. I believe I mentioned it on the show before, but we've been doing a little bit of cross-promotion with them recently. They were kind enough to play our bumper on their show, and I would like to plug them again here on our program. And it's a nice compliment, because we're dealing with a lot of these classic pieces. We dive real deep into each novel, and it's a very different format. Their format and their show is author interviews, and they've got new authors, they've got big names, they've got a little bit of everybody in there. And then they also cover a lot of new releases, which is great. So I listen to them, and I will get recommendations from their show every single episode. The production quality is great. It's hosted by writers Eric Beetner and S.W. Lawton. And I can't really recommend it enough. If you're going to listen to 2 podcasts about crime fiction, listen to us and listen to them. I'll let you listen to their bumper and let them speak for themselves here. So give Writer Types a listen.
Writer Types is a podcast all about crime and mystery fiction.
We interview authors from debut novelists to living legends.
This is Lee Child.
I'm Alistair Burke.
This is Lawrence Bly.
Rachel Halsell Hall.
This is Ian Rankin.
Hey, I'm Lou Burney.
I'm Lori Rader Day.
It's fast and funny and comes at you twice a month.
We cover it all. Thrillers, mystery, noir, even a little cozy thrown in there.
Did we mention that we were nominated for an award?
No, we did not, Eric, because we lost.
Oh, yeah, right.
Writer Types. Available wherever you get your podcasts, and lose your rewards.
All right, it is time for a new segment on the show, and this one we're roughly going to call it Dog-Eared Classics for right now. What this is going to be is, as we move forward here, we're well, not quite yet, obviously, but we will be getting away from some of these classic works of noir and hard-boiled fiction. And especially a book like this makes me want to stay connected to that genre. So what I'm going to be doing here is providing a little more of an extended review on a classic, well, a little known quote-unquote classic piece of hard-boiled or noir fiction. And the rules for this are basically going to be that the book has to have been published before Justin and I were born, and I'm going to try to keep it like pre-1965 or something like that. So more in the golden age of some of these classic tales. So the first one I have up for this episode is No Orchids for Miss Blandish. This was published in 1939. And it was originally published in the U.S. as The Villain and the Virgin. It's by James Hadley Chase. He is an English guy, and it's a story of a young rich woman who is kidnapped and held hostage by a gang. She's initially held for ransom, but the ransom is paid, and the gang decides to keep her because the gang's toughest member has basically decided that he wants to force her to be his wife. And if you get that, then you know it's going to be a bit of a brutal novel because of the subject matter that it covers. And it does deal with physical, mental, and sexual abuse. And it was controversial when it was released. I'm not sure it would be quite as controversial today because a lot of those things take place off the page. It was originally banned in parts of England for being pornographic. It's still a fairly violent book. This was James Hadley Chase's first novel. And as I said, he was an Englishman, and he wrote about America with not ever really visiting here. So he was getting his information from the news and other writers. And you can kind of feel that in the book. It does feel a little awkward at times, but it's still a good, hard-boiled, like gang type story. And he was inspired by The Postman Always Rings Twice and the infamous Midwestern gang of Ma Barker and her sons. And that does come through because the gang is led by this woman, and she kind of rules the gang with an iron fist sort of thing. Interestingly, this book was called by George Orwell a pure fascism, and I'm not quite sure what he meant by that because I didn't see that in this book. But he also said it was a brilliant piece of writing with hardly a wasted word or a jarring note anywhere. And I would say it's pretty solid. It is a pretty solidly written book. And it was popular in its time. The book sold at least 500,000 copies, and it was made into 2 films, both in 1948 in the UK under the same title, and then actually as early as 1971 in the US as the film The Grissom Gang. Chase would go on to write 90 books in his career. And overall, I would give this one, a pretty good hit, pretty good recommendation. Not something I'd want to cover as a main topic necessarily, but it's a solid, hard-boiled story with an interesting rogues gallery of criminals. The plot was a little bit predictable by today's standards, but like I said, the writing was pretty solid. And then one weird thing about this is, as I was reading it, I had the PDF version, and like something doesn't quite make sense in this book. At somewhere along the line, the book was rewritten to include more modern technology.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's not terrible, but like they casually mention televisions, and then at the end there's a helicopter, and it's like, wait a minute, there weren't any helicopters in 1939, and the television was invented, but not in. It wouldn't have been something that the average person would have access to.
Sounds like George Lucas syndrome here.
Yeah, it was a little bit weird. So I'm guessing that the PDF version or ebook version that I had must have been a rewrite from probably when one of the films were released, and some editor thought it would be good to modernize it. Otherwise, it feels really at home in the 1930s with gangsters and bootleggers and the like.
Cool. Well, thanks. I like the idea of this dog-eared classics mini section to sort of separate out some of these older classic noir and hard-boiled novels that we just wouldn't, or maybe would get lost in the sea of contemporary work that we like to review for a 5-round burst. So I think it's something that we should stick with.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be something I'm enjoying doing, and I want to definitely look at ones that wouldn't make a good main topic, but are worth a little bit further review.
Sounds good.
All right, so as normal, we'll get into a little bit of a biography of our author for today's selection, and that's Horace McCoy. And do you remember old Horace from our episode on the Black Mask Boys, Justin?
I do. I mean, I remember him enough. I had a little bit of... I remember that story we read of his. Wasn't he writing about that flying ace down on the border? There were some fisticuffs, and all of a sudden we were on a plane over the Gulf of Mexico fighting dudes.
Yeah, that's the guy.
That's the guy. And I wouldn't have anticipated that he could write a book like They Shoot Horses, Don't They? It felt like two different worlds, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are. And, admittedly, he called this his best piece of writing when he finished it. And I think he was pretty much right about that. This is the best thing he ever wrote and ever would write. So let's look a little bit at Horace McCoy's life. First of all, he was born in 1897 in Pegram, I think that's how you say it, Tennessee. And he was one of 4 kids. His parents were Nanny Holt and James Harris McCoy. Now, his father was a teacher and his mother was said to be passionate about literature. So he describes his childhood at one point as being book rich and money poor, which, I guess that's not so bad.
No.
So anyway, he gets around. Horace McCoy has quite the life. At a very early age, he leaves Tennessee for Texas. He becomes a car mechanic, a taxi driver. Then when World War I breaks out, he's joined the Texas National Guard, and he'll see service in Europe in the American Air Service. This author is not lying when it comes to his experience as a fighter pilot for his many stories. He was trained initially as an aerial photographer and a bombardier. And one time in August 5th of 1918, his pilot was killed, and McCoy had to take over the controls. They had dual controls in this old plane, and he was being hunted by 4 German the fighter planes of the time, and they were shooting at him. So he's flying the plane, shooting his machine gun, and he shoots down one of the enemy planes. He gets hit by a machine gun himself, and he manages to fly the bullet-ridden plane back to its home base. He got the famous French, I can't pronounce it, but the French medal for air valor in the air for that. He recovers from that wound, and he gets training as a fighter pilot. He spent 400 hours over enemy lines as a pilot during that time, and he gets a couple of medals. He's wounded a couple of times, and he says he was on track to outshine Eddie Rickenbacker, who was the top American ace of World War I. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But he was apparently one hell of a fighter pilot, or pilot, I guess I should say. Oh. And he called the air was the last outpost of chivalry and romance. And I know that there's a lot of nostalgia for that World War I flying, but he certainly took to it. He comes back to the United States, and this is when he starts writing. He's working as a journalist back down in Dallas. He becomes a sports editor, and this connects him with a lot of rich people. And he sees himself as wanting to be rich. He wants to be a social climber, and he likes the high life. He gets into competitive sports, swimming, tennis, golf, and handball, competes in all of those, does pretty well. He gets married for the first time to Lowline Shear down there. They have one son who I've never heard or seen mentioned again, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. He starts acting in local theater. He likes to borrow his rich friends' fast cars and airplanes and crashes a few of them. Walks away from that. And then in 1927, he starts writing for Black Mask magazine and the Captain Jerry Frost stories that you talked about. he gets his start with our old pal, Captain Shaw.
Yeah.
He's living this high life. He loses his newspaper job. His marriage ends. He's got extensive creditors. He has a brief marriage to an oil heiress who, once her family finds out about it, they annul the marriage or something. And so he kind of falls, he kind of crashes his life, just like the airplane there. And in 1931, he heads off to Hollywood for a screen test. He has dreams of being on film. That doesn't work out. He was considered a decent actor for the community theater, but apparently didn't have what it took to get into Hollywood. This is where we get the story of so many of our authors during the 1930s. He starts doing the random job. This is when he has a job as a Hollywood extra. He's a bodyguard for a time. He works in a soda shop. Then he also claims, and he didn't claim this till later in life, but he also says he was a bouncer at a dance marathon, but there's nothing to exactly back that up. Yeah, like I said, he's sleeping in cars and just doing whatever he can to get by. And then eventually he does break through. He gets a couple of bit roles as some extras in some film. But what this does allow him to do is does get him a door into, or opens the door to screenwriting. And that's what he would do as his primary source of income for the rest of his life. He gets married to his third and final wife, Helen Vinmont, and they would go on to have a couple of kids. And pretty much, as soon as things start turning around here, he stops writing for Black Mask and starts writing more of his novels. And that's when I Shoot Horses would be started as a novel. It started actually as a screenplay, but which might explain sort of its pacing and its brevity, I guess. It was initially called Marathon Dancers, and that's what he did call it, the best damn thing that he had done yet. And in 1935, it gets published and only sells 3,000 copies, but that was actually considered pretty good numbers for the middle of the Depression. Now he is a novelist.
Woo!
Yes, he would go on to write No Pockets in a Shroud in 1937, I Should Have Stayed Home in 1938, Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye in 1948, Scalpel in 1952, and Corruption City would come out after his death in 1959. As a screenwriter, he would be involved in nobody really knows exactly how many scripts he worked on, but he had a hand in at least 100 different scripts. 30 screenplays are credited to him as more of a lead writer. And his best known film, and this is a film people actually still watch today, is the film Gentleman Jim, and that starred Errol Flynn.
Aha. Well, he was an old silent movie rapscallion, wasn't he? Swashbuckling pirate type?
Yes. Errol Flynn was, he was notorious for a number of things.
Oh, was he also a Nazi?
Yes, he was also a Nazi,
Great.
and I believe he liked young people.
So he was just the full package.
Yeah, I think there were some issues with old Errol Flynn, but people still know him. For the most part, McCoy was kind of relegated to writing B movies. He didn't have a lot of breakthrough scripts, and that made him kind of depressed and whatnot. And it wasn't until 1947 when a copy of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Was published in France. And that's when it really breaks through, is when the French discover him in 1947. And he wouldn't really have a whole lot of life left here. But in 1948, he gets a severe flu, and that was bad enough that it damaged his heart.
Yeah.
And that'll come up here. But this renewed interest in his work kind of does motivate him creatively, and he would then finish Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye. Now, he thought this was his best work to date. I tried reading it, and I did finish it. It didn't really work for me. There's some good stuff, but it follows another quote-unquote highly intelligent criminal, and it's kind of told from his point of view. And compared to other works that we've looked at with that sort of character, it falls a little flat. But and reviewers didn't necessarily like it at the time. Time magazine, quote-unquote, called him a literary caveman.
Not good.
But it is, it's for the brutality of it. I think One of the things with his writing in the novel that I looked at is there's moments of brilliance in there, and then there's just too much other crap going on. Huh. His big breakthrough pay-wise was in 1951. He sold the movie rights to the book Scalpel for $100,000, and this allows him to go to France and meet with the intellectuals there, and that was supposedly a really big thing for him. In 1955, he was working on a book called The Hard Rock Man about some kind of dam builder guy, and he suffered a heart attack. That was early in the year. He suffers another heart attack on December 15th, 1955, and that he would die from that heart attack in Beverly Hills at the age of 58. Money was a problem for him multiple times during his life. He died broke. At the time of his death, he had been involved in over 100 screenplays. He had published 6 novels, and he had 16 short stories published in Black Mask magazine, as well as he was the primary writer for a magazine called Battle Aces, and he was also published in numerous other pulps of the time. Critic John Whitley said of him, "At his best, he had a vigorous style, a keen ear for dialogue, and a robust sense of the dark underside of the American dream."
All right. He sounds like an interesting guy with a lot of different phases in his life before he found his niche as a screenwriter and novelist.
So, well, that is Horace McCoy.
All right. Well, I love that he did this book, and I look forward to returning to this book in part 2. I can't say I'm incredibly excited about reading the rest of his canon, but I know that the book you read and a couple others were at least not entirely panned. So, but I think this is the consensus creme de la creme here. They Shoot Horses.
Yeah, certainly. We'll look forward to looking at his best work in part 2 of this episode of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? You can get in touch with us on Facebook at Point Blank Hardboiled Noir and Detective Fiction. You can send us an email at pointblanknoir@gmail.com. We're on Twitter at @pointblanknoir. And we would really encourage you to get involved with our Goodreads group. Probably the easiest way to do that is to search under Goodreads groups and look for Point Blank, and you'll see our logo at the group.
And coming up in future episodes, after part 2 of They Shoot Horses, Don't They, we're going to visit another dead white guy. This one is Ernest Hemingway for episode 19. We're going to spend some time with one of his lesser heralded novels and one that probably he was closest to hard-boiled. It's To Have and Have Not. Following episode 19, we're going to spend some time with Cormac McCarthy, who's not dead yet, and visit border noir with No Country for Old Men. And then, I know you've all been waiting for our international world tour. We know we're excited about it. We're going to start our international world tour by flying into the Mediterranean and spending time with Jean-Claude Izzo's Total Chaos, set in Marseille, France. So those are some things to look forward to. But if you have not read this book yet, make sure that you got a couple more weeks, so make sure you dive in. It's not very long, and it certainly packs a punch.
We'll see you next time.
Adios.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.